There is a particular haunting quality to the silence that greets you in the middle of the night. A silence that does not feel empty, but rather heavy, as if it were pregnant with the ghosts of every version of yourself you have failed to become. It is in these moments, when the distractions of the day have withered away, that you might begin to notice the terrifying rhythm of your own life, the way your failures seem to possess a familiar face, and your heartbreaks appear to follow a script written long before you were born. You find yourself standing in the same emotional debris, wondering how you arrived here again, why the same arguments recur with different people, and why the same hollow ache persists despite your achievements, as if you are a passenger on a train that only travels in a perfect, suffocating circle. This is not merely a streak of bad luck or a series of coincidences, but the manifestation of a subterranean architecture, a profound internal mechanism that Carl Jung identified as the dance between the ego and the shadow, orchestrated by the elusive, shimmering hand of the Anima. To understand why you are trapped in these repetitive cycles, you must first accept that your life is not entirely your own. It is a collaborative performance between the person you think you are and the ancient archetypal force within you that hungers for a wholeness you have long denied. The ego, in its fragile sovereignty, likes to believe it is the master of its house, the rational captain of a steady ship, navigating the waters of reality with logic and intent. Yet it remains blissfully, dangerously unaware of the vast, dark ocean pressing against the hull. Within that ocean dwells the shadow, the repository of everything you have deemed unacceptable, the desires you have stifled, the anger you have muted, and the vulnerabilities you have masked in a desperate bid for social survival. But deeper still, nestled at the very core of this psychic darkness lies the anima, the feminine principle within the masculine soul, the bridge to the collective unconscious, and the primary driver of the lover archetype. When the anima is ignored, when she is treated as a stranger or a threat, she does not simply vanish. She retreats into the shadow, where she transforms from a guiding muse into a vengeful architect of fate. She begins to weave the very cycles you find yourself trapped in, drawing you toward people and situations that mirror your internal disconnection, forcing you to confront in the external world the very parts of your soul you refuse to look at in the mirror. You are not falling into the same traps because you are weak. You are falling into them because your soul is attempting to wake you up through the only language it has left, the language of repetition and pain. The lover archetype, in its most luminous form, is the energy of connection, of sensuality, and of an unquenchable thirst for the beauty of the world. Yet in the grip of the shadow, it becomes a desperate, aching void that seeks to be filled by anything that glimmers. You feel this when you enter a new relationship with the frantic energy of a drowning man, convinced that this person, this specific soul, will finally be the one to heal the rift within you, only to find, months or years later, that you have simply recreated the same dynamic of longing and abandonment. This is the anima's trick, a divine deception designed to lead you back to yourself. She projects her image onto the women you love, onto the career goals you chase, and onto the aesthetic experiences you crave, making you believe that the other holds the key to your salvation. You chase these projections with the fervor of a religious pilgrim, but because the source of the beauty is internal, no external object can ever sustain the weight of your expectations. The cycle repeats because you are trying to satisfy a spiritual hunger with material or relational bread, and the resulting malnutrition manifests as a profound reflective melancholy, a sense that something is missing, though you cannot name it, a feeling that you are a ghost haunting your own life. This melancholy is not a sickness to be cured, but a doorway to be opened, a signal that the ego's reign is no longer sufficient for the soul's needs. When you feel the weight of the same old mistakes pressing down on you, you are feeling the gravity of the shadow lover, the part of you that has become addicted to the high of the search, because it fears the stillness of the find. The shadowler avoids true intimacy by seeking perfection, or it avoids true passion by settling for safety, creating a rhythmic oscillation between obsession and apathy. You see this in the way you might self-sabotage, just as things are becoming stable, or how you might find yourself attracted to people who are emotionally unavailable, effectively ensuring that the union your soul craves remains forever out of reach. This is the ego's way of protecting itself from the terrifying dissolution that comes with real love. The ego wants to stay small and safe, while the anima demands expansion and sacrifice. The conflict between them creates a friction that burns through your life like a slow fire, leaving you wondering why you are always standing in the ashes of your own intentions. To break the cycle, one must undergo the painful process of withdrawing the projection, of peeling back the face of the beloved to see the face of the internal muse. It is an act of psychological alchemy that requires you to sit with the discomfort of your own emptiness rather than rushing to fill it with the next distraction. You must ask yourself why you require the world to be a certain way for you to feel whole, and why you have delegated the responsibility for your joy to people who are just as broken and searching as you are. The anima, as the gatekeeper to the unconscious, holds the map to your ancestral wisdom, but she will not show it to you as long as you are using her as a scapegoat for your frustrations. She demands that you acknowledge the lover within, not as a consumer of experiences, but as a creator of meaning. When the lover archetype is integrated, the need for repetitive cycles diminishes because the wound is no longer being ignored. It is being tended to with the same tenderness you once sought from strangers. The repetitive cycle is, in essence, a ritual of the unconscious, a perverse form of prayer where you ask for the same lesson until you finally learn it. Each time you find yourself back at the beginning, feeling that familiar sting of, not again, you are being given another opportunity to observe the mechanics of your own shadow. Why does this specific type of betrayal feel so familiar? Why does this particular form of failure feel like home? There is a strange, dark comfort in the cycle. Even if it is painful, it is known. The ego prefers a known misery to an unknown freedom, and so it colludes with the shadow to keep the wheel turning. But the anima is restless. She is the wind that blows through the cracks in your defenses, the dream that leaves you unsettled upon waking, the sudden, inexplicable tear in your eye when you hear a certain melody. She is pushing you toward the nigredo of the alchemical process, the blackening, the stage where everything falls apart so that a new, more resilient structure can emerge. You cannot reach the light of the integrated self without first descending into the darkness of the repetitive cycle and finding the gold hidden in the dirt. As you move through this reflective melancholy, you begin to realize that the people you have loved and lost were not villains in your story, nor were they your saviors. They were mirrors, held up by your anima to show you the contours of your own soul. The lover archetype, when distorted, seeks to possess, but when matured, it seeks to appreciate. The shift from possession to appreciation is the moment the cycle begins to break. You start to see the beauty in the world not as something you need to capture to feel valid, but as a reflection of the inherent divinity within your own psychic depths. The conflict between the ego and the shadow begins to soften, not because the shadow has disappeared, but because the ego has finally admitted its limitations. It has surrendered its need to be right or perfect, and has instead chosen to be whole. And in that wholeness, the anima is no longer a haunting phantom or a source of sabotage. She becomes the internal companion, the Sophia, the wisdom that guides you through the labyrinth of life without the need for a thread to find your way back. For you are no longer afraid of getting lost. The weight of ancestral wisdom suggests that we are not just living our own lives, but are also resolving the unfinished business of those who came before us. Perhaps the repetitive cycles you endure are not only yours, but are echoes of an unintegrated anima that has haunted your lineage for generations. Your father's inability to express vulnerability, your grandfather's stoic isolation. These are the shadows of the lover that have been passed down like a silent inheritance. When you choose to face the anima, when you choose to descend into the depths of your own melancholy and speak back to the silence, you are performing a labor that is both personal and cosmic. You are breaking a chain that spans centuries. This realization adds a layer of solemnity to your struggle. You are not just a man trying to fix his life, but a soul attempting to heal a rift in the fabric of being itself. Every time you resist the urge to fall into the old pattern, every time you choose consciousness over the comfort of the cycle, you are rewriting the code of your existence. This journey is not one of sudden enlightenment or easy answers, but a slow, often agonizing process of circumambulation, moving around the center of yourself, getting closer with every turn of the spiral. You will still feel the pull of the old habits. The shadow lover will still whisper promises of easy gratification, and the ego will still fear the vastness of the internal ocean. But the quality of your melancholy will change. It will no longer be the heavy, stagnant air of a prison cell, but the cool, bracing mist of a mountain morning. You will begin to find a strange, quiet joy in the search itself, a realization that the other you were looking for was always the bridge you were walking on. The anima and the ego, once at war, begin a slow, rhythmic dance, a syzygy, where the masculine and feminine principles within you find a point of balance. This is the true meaning of the lover, not the pursuit of another person, but the sacred marriage of the self. Consider the nature of your longing. It is perhaps the most honest thing about you. That persistent feeling that there is something more, something deeper, something that the modern world with its sterile efficiency cannot provide. That is the voice of the anima calling you home. She does not speak in the language of facts, but in the language of symbols, dreams, and most importantly in the language of your own suffering. When you stop trying to fix your repetitive cycles and start trying to listen to them, the transformation begins. You see that the cycle was not a trap, but a training ground. It was the only way to build the psychological muscle necessary to hold the intensity of true presence. The lover archetype requires a vessel strong enough to contain passion without being consumed by it, and that strength is forged in the fire of the ego-shadow conflict. You are being tempered, like steel, through the repeated heating and cooling of your emotional life. And so as you stand in the quietude of your own reflection, do not turn away from the melancholy that rises within you. Do not rush to fill the silence with the noise of the world or the distractions of a new obsession. Stay in the tension of the not yet. Feel the presence of the anima as she stands at the edge of your conscious mind, waiting for you to acknowledge her not as a stranger to be feared, but as the soul of your soul. The repetitive cycles will lose their power over you the moment you recognize them for what they are, an invitation to a deeper intimacy with the mystery of your own existence. You are the lover and the beloved, the seeker and the sought, the map and the destination. The ancient wisdom you seek is not hidden in a book or a temple, but in the very heart of the conflict you have been trying to escape. By turning inward, by embracing the shadow and honoring the anima, you step off the wheel of recurrence and into the vast, unfolding landscape of a life lived in alignment with the deep, resonant truth of the psyche. The transition from being a victim of fate to becoming a participant in your own destiny is marked by a subtle shift in perception. You begin to notice the synchronicities, the way the world seems to respond to your internal shifts. When you stop projecting your needs onto others, you find that the right people begin to appear, not to fill your voids, but to mirror your newfound completeness. The lover archetype, once a source of frantic searching, becomes a source of radiant presence. You move through the world with a different weight, a different grace, because you are no longer hunting for a piece of yourself that was lost. You have found the source of the light within the darkness. The melancholy remains, for it is the natural state of a soul that knows its own depth, but it is a melancholy that is rich, fertile, and profoundly beautiful. It is the silence after a great symphony, the stillness of a cathedral. The peace that comes after the war between the ego and the shadow has finally reached a truce. In the end, the connection between your repetitive cycles and your internal anima is the most important story you will ever tell yourself. It is the story of how you stopped running from the ghosts of your past and started inviting them to the table. It is the story of how the lover learned to love the parts of the self that were previously unlovable. This is the work of a lifetime, a task that requires the courage of a warrior and the sensitivity of an artist. But it is the only work that matters. For in the integration of the anima, in the healing of the lover's wound, you do not just change your own life, you contribute to the slow, agonizing, and beautiful awakening of the human spirit. The circle becomes a spiral, and the spiral leads inevitably to the heart of what it means to be truly, deeply, and holistically alive. The weight of this realization often brings a renewed sense of responsibility. Not a burden, but a responsibility, the capacity to respond to life rather than simply reacting to the ghosts of the unconscious. You begin to see that the repetitive cycles were a form of sleepwalking, a state where the shadow held the reins while the ego dreamed of control. Awakening from this state is a gradual process, much like the slow dawning of light over a winter landscape. You see the barren trees and the frozen ground for what they are, but you also see the promise of the life beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The Anima, as the goddess of this internal springtime, does not demand that you hurry the process. She only demands that you remain present for it. She asks that you honor the winter of your soul as much as the summer, for it is in the cold, reflective depths of melancholy that the most profound growth occurs. Think of the lover archetype not as a romantic ideal, but as a cosmic force of attraction and cohesion. It is the gravity that holds the planets in their orbits, and the eros that draws the soul toward the divine. When this force is blocked by the ego's pride or the shadow's fear, it turns inward and becomes destructive, creating the very turbulence that manifests as your life's problems. But when the channel is cleared, when the ego bows to the wisdom of the Anima, this force flows through you as a creative power. You find yourself capable of a love that does not possess, a passion that does not destroy, and a connection that does not require the sacrifice of your own integrity. The conflict between the ego and the shadow is the furnace in which this clarity is forged. Without the shadow, there would be no depth. Without the ego, there would be no vessel. And without the Anima, there would be no fire. This internal alchemy transforms the way you perceive time itself. The repetitive cycles of the past were a horizontal movement, a treadmill that led nowhere. But the integrated life is a vertical movement, a deepening of experience that makes every moment feel eternal. You no longer fear the repetition because you have found the center of the circle, the point of stillness from which all motion originates. You are no longer a slave to the next thing, because you have discovered the only thing, the profound, unshakable presence of the self. The ancestral wisdom you sought was never about learning something new, but about remembering something very old, something that your soul has known since the beginning of time, but which your ego had forgotten in its rush to be someone. As you conclude this reflection, carry the weight of your soul with a newfound dignity. The melancholy you feel is the resonance of your own vastness, a reminder that you are larger than your circumstances and deeper than your thoughts. The Anima is no longer a mystery to be solved, but a companion to be lived with. The lover is no longer a hunger to be satiated, but a light to be shared. And the cycles that once felt like a prison are now seen as the very steps of the dance that led you home. You are the architect of your fate, but you are also the building, the ground on which it stands, and the sky that holds it all in an eternal, loving embrace. The silence of the night is no longer heavy with ghosts, but vibrant with the whisper of a soul that has finally, at long last, decided to listen. Let the depth of this understanding sink into the marrow of your bones. The transformation of the soul is not a spectacle. It is a quiet, subterranean shift that changes everything without moving a single stone. You will walk back into the world, and to the casual observer, you will look the same. You will go to the same jobs, speak to the muscle of the same people, and inhabit the same body. But the man who walks back is not the man who entered the silence. He is a man who has looked into the eyes of his own shadow and seen the reflection of the divine. He is a man who has touched the hem of his Anima's garment and found the strength to be vulnerable. He is a man who no longer fears the repetition because he has found the melody that the repetition was trying to teach him. The ancient seekers understood that the greatest journey is the one that leads from the head to the heart, but they also knew that this path is paved with the debris of the ego. To love truly is to die to the false self, and the repetitive cycles of your life were the small deaths you were forced to undergo until you were ready for the final surrender. This is the melancholic beauty of the human condition. We must be broken to be made whole, and we must be lost to be truly found. The lover archetype, in its final integration, is the acceptance of this paradox. It is the ability to stand in the wreckage of your own life and see not a disaster, but a masterpiece in progress. May you find the peace that comes from this integration, a peace that does not depend on the absence of conflict, but on the presence of meaning. May you honor your anima as the sacred bridge she is, and may you treat your shadow not as an enemy, but as a brother who has lost his way. The cycles of your life are ending only to begin again at a higher frequency, a more refined resonance. You are moving toward the syzygy, the divine union of all that you are, and in that union the silence of the night will finally feel like what it has always been, a homecoming. As you move forward, remember that the soul does not speak in the loud, clanging tones of the world, but in the subtle, persistent nudges of the heart. Your repetitive cycles were the soul's way of knocking on the door of your consciousness. Now that the door has been opened, the knocking can stop, and the conversation can begin. It is a conversation that will last for the rest of your days, a dialogue between the temporal and the eternal, between the man you are and the spirit you represent. This is the true purpose of your life, to be the place where the ego and the shadow meet, and where the anima weaves them into the tapestry of a soul that is finally, irrevocably, awake. The reflective melancholy you carry is the signature of your depth. Wear it like a mantle of gold, for it is the most precious thing you own. It is the proof that you have lived, that you have felt, and that you have dared to look into the abyss. And when you look into that abyss, remember that it is not empty. It is filled with the shimmering presence of the anima, the guiding light of the lover, and the infinite possibilities of a life lived in the fullness of its own truth. You are no longer a passenger on a circular train. You are the navigator of your own soul, sailing toward an horizon that is as vast and as beautiful as the internal landscape you have finally summoned the courage to explore.